Measles was eliminated in the U.S. in 2000, believe it or not, but globally, there are 20 million cases and more than 150,000 children die of measles each and every year. Why are we seeing a resurgence of measles in this country? Dr. Ken Haller joins us, pediatrician with SSM Cardinal Glennon. Good morning, doctor. Welcome back to KTRS.
Good morning. My pleasure.
So what do you know about Minnesota, and are you watching and monitoring this depending on what happens here?
Sure. We are very concerned about what's going on in Minnesota. Apparently, these people who are the hardcore anti-vax people, advocates went in to to this immigrant community, the Somali community, and kind of played on their fears about vaccination and autism and things like that, and spread a lot of, frankly, fake news about vaccines and about autism, and scared a lot of people into not vaccinating their kids. And now there are over 40 kids who've been diagnosed with measles. 11 of them are in the hospital. Some of them are on respirators. And it is unfortunate. And in fact, Andrew Wakefield, who's this person who wrote this paper 13 years ago, which has been thoroughly discredited, is one of the people who went in, and when asked, do you feel any responsibility for these kids' illness, he said, I don't feel any responsibility about this at all, which I think says a lot about these people who are the most rabid anti-vaxxers on that side of the issue.
Explain to me how world-class surgeons like yourself, world-class doctors, it's sort of settled science that vaccines work. And yet these people somehow are able to get a foothold into some of these people and trick them into thinking that these vaccines are dangerous.
Right. I think a lot of it, frankly, comes down to what the responsibility that we have as physicians is that sometimes we are not the best at giving messages like this. Sometimes when we stick completely to science and don't address the emotional component of this, we miss out. So if someone comes to me and says, I've heard this stuff. I've heard this stuff on TV. I've heard this stuff that vaccines can be dangerous. I'm a little scared about vaccinating my kid. If I say, oh, come on, what's the matter with you? If you love your kid, you get him vaccinated. Come on, we all know what's real. Just go ahead and do it. If you were a good parent, you'd do that. Now, shaming and blaming people is not the way to get the stuff across, even though everything I said might be completely accurate. Unfortunately, because doctors, we spend so much time in the head space and in the fact space, and it's all about the science. Mm-hmm. That message can come across as being, thoughtless and not empathetic. Mm-hmm. What I prefer to say to people is, something, having a kid is to fall into love and into fear in ways you never imagined for the rest of your life. If you are afraid for your child's safety, that's normal, it's natural, it's healthy. It tells me you're a good parent and that you love your child and you want the best. Now, what I can add to this is that as a physician, this is what I've seen, this is what I know. I am familiar personally, either as a human being who's had these diseases as a kid or as a physician who's seen them with every single disease we can vaccinate against. I don't want your kid to get sick with that. I know you don't want that either because you're a good parent.
Right.
And I don't want your parent to be, or your child to be the next kid that I see who has whooping cough and ends up in the hospital.
They do play on the fears, saying, wait a minute, the vaccines cause autism. The vaccine, you get more problems from the vaccine than you do from what the vaccines is trying to prevent.
Right. And what they play on the fear, and it's a very normal fear. The thing is that if for a lot of parents, they make this calculus about what's real and what's not. And the thing is that most people, frankly, vaccines have been incredibly successful. They're kind of a victim of their own success. We have been so successful at not completely eradicating, but making these diseases so unusual, even rare, that people don't know how bad they are. Mm-hmm. Now, back in the 50s, 60s, even 70s, people knew how bad whooping cough was. They knew how bad polio was. There was no question you'd get your kid vaccinated. And even if sometimes the kids might have a fever when they get the vaccine or have some soreness on the arm, they go, something, it's worth it. Mm-hmm. I don't want my kid to get that terrible disease that my neighbor had, that my uncle had. I don't want my kid to go through this. Now people say, I've never seen it, so I don't know how bad it is. And so people who can prey on these fears and say, something, these diseases don't even exist, they're not that bad, and this is what can happen, and you don't want that to happen. And for a person to think, well, if I do something, even if it's a minuscule chance that there's something I could do that might hurt my child, That is just unacceptable, and they prey on those fears.
How bad is the anti-vaccine movement here? Are you seeing it grow? Are there pockets? Is it as bad as it is here? What are your thoughts about St. Louis?
Actually, it is. It's not as bad here as it is in other parts of the country. Southern California, it's particularly. It's pretty bad.
Well, it had that Disneyland or that Disney World
Right.
outbreak there.
Yeah, the Disneyland outbreak was really a wake up call to a lot of people. And in fact, I have colleagues, friends who were pediatricians in California, who have said that people, if you don't vaccinate, you can't come into my practice. And a lot of that is because they have parents who've said to them, do you allow people who don't vaccinate to come into your practice? Because if you do, I don't want to come to your practice. So there are also people who say, I don't want to be in an office where I might get infected by another kid. The anti-vaccine movement in the Midwest in particular is not as overwhelming as it is in other parts of the country, but we still do run into it.
Yeah.
And I found that compassionate, empathetic response of saying, being scared for your kid's safety is normal. That's where we can open the conversation. That's where we can get to facts.
Humanizing the message.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Doctor, there are people who are saying, okay, great, vaccines work, but you know what? So many, so fast. Why can't I just spread them out a little more? What's so terrible about delaying them for a while?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, the reason we give these vaccines so early is because that's when kids are most likely to get really, really sick with these diseases. If a teenager gets whooping cough, it's bad. They're sick for a couple of weeks. They may have to stay out of school. If a 2-month-old gets whooping cough, they're in the hospital. They're on oxygen. Sometimes they need a tube down their throat. That's why we have to vaccinate kids early. That's why we have vaccines, because these diseases are life-threatening and they do kill people. And the younger you are, the more likely it is you get killed. The argument I hear is, doesn't it overwhelm the immune system to give this stuff? Well, the thing is, the vaccines we give as shots to kids at 2, 4, and 6 months, there's no actually living virus or bacteria in any of them. They're parts of the virus or bacteria that allow the immune system to say, hey, that's not part of Johnny. If I see that, I'm going to attack it, so that when the real virus shows up, it can destroy it before it proliferates. The thing is that if your immune system was not able to handle that, to be blunt, your child would not survive to be 2 months old, because the moment that child enters the birth canal, they start encountering bacteria and viruses and fungus and all these things in our world, and their immune system is working all the time. I mean, by the time a kid leaves the hospital, they've encountered hundreds, if not thousands, of different microorganisms, and their body is starting to build up its own immunity and its own symbiosis with it.
Right.
And so the reason we have vaccines is against things that can kill you. The vast majority of bacteria are either friendly or they're benign, but those ones that can kill you, those are the ones we have to protect against.
This Minnesota outbreak, you said 40 some odd kids who are come down with the measles, 11 are in the hospital. No, there's been a giant increase in measles, no increase in autism.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Or decrease, right? So
Right.
autism stayed the same. People aren't getting vaccinated. Measles are going through the roof.
Yeah.
Autism levels are still the
And
same.
it was just like one child, wasn't it? I think within that community who was
Right.
actually diagnosed with autism.
Right.
And that's
It's when epidemiologists, people who are much smarter than me, looked at the data in that community versus the larger Minneapolis-St. Paul community, they found the rates of autism were equal, in those communities. But again, the anti-vaxxers were going in saying, you have so many more kids who are getting this, and your kids are susceptible to it, and it's complete garbage.
Dr. Ken Haller, you're always welcome here, a pediatrician with SSM Cardinal Glennon. Thanks, Doc.
Thanks,
Thank
my
you.
pleasure.
727 here.